Heyo, what is up everyone? It is the Alpha J Show, and let's revisit the Ed, and Eddy big picture story. So this extra discussion and every one that I'm going to be doing forward will be different because I want to make these more interesting. So I decided to open the floodgates and allow and actually read comments that contribute to said review. In this case, the movie, while also going over the other points that I decided to hold off on. In the original review, I left 3 big points to this extra discussion: the losing hat scene, the deconstruction scene, and the ending scene. And since then, I have tripled my points, with many more points that I want to dive deeper into talking about, so strap in and let's get into this. And at the end of these points, I will read comments. Before I begin this extra discussion, because it is going to be a little long, I do want to shout out these comments here. They're very motivating, and I've been getting a lot of them, and I wish I could shout them all out, but it does let me know that you guys really do enjoy what I'm doing here, and I'm going to try to improve and make the best videos that I can. So let's get into this. It's been long awaited. Also, for this specific video, I have been getting comments here and there about this video, and I'm personally very grateful that people are really hyped for these future videos that I put out, because it really does pay off when I edit them. So let's talk about the reason this entire movie happened: a scam. We don't know too much about the scam besides a few cosmetic things like a red button and everyone wanting to know about the scam. It does leave that talking point out to the public to make speculation. Should they have gone down this route? Well, to be clear, yes, this worked, but considering this and another scene later in this video, it does lead to unsatisfaction. And it does feel like they did it this way because the writers might not have had a scam up the scale that would have matched the grand nature of the movie, a la Return of Slade. I do think that the movie could have benefited more with a lot more hints to the scam. It doesn't have to paint a full picture, but the writers could have met us halfway. I don't think that's too bad, especially since this was the finale. It does leave a lot more to the movie to dive into the relationships of the children, but does that mean that the core of the show, the scams, and how they failed because of the quirks of those involved, was set aside for pretty much a long walk to her brother's house? And looking back, if I ever said I did like the ambiguity of the scam, which I don't really remember, but if I did, I'm going to chalk that up to being an optimistic person. I want to retract that, because now it is not something I am okay with. It's not a deal breaker, but it's something you don't want to think about because at the end of the day, you won't find an answer. Now, in the review, towards the end, I talk about the best and worst characters in terms of their performance to the movie. In the worst, I said Johnny, and one of the cankers, and I do want to give more of a reason why, because the movie at its core was about adventure comedy and character dynamic. So take Johnny, who was alienated from the adventure because he was late, whose comedic moments were very few and far in between, and this flat character dynamic with Plank, who was only really addressed briefly at the end in a misunderstanding, so I wasn't even clear, and now he's like the butt of the cul-de-sac. It's not that he was bad per se, but he was the weakest out of all of the children in the movie, and his side plot was very linear. Unlike Rolf and Wilfred, which dives into their themes, or Naz and Kevin, which also dives into their themes, it's merely Johnny looking for the Eds, Johnny's on his way to the Eds, Johnny catching the Eds. It makes his character look slightly one note, which is unfortunate for the grand journey that is this movie. Johnny also has the ending portion, which unfortunately is overshadowed by the part where the cul-de-sac accepts the Eds. So let's paint a scenario where the children of the cul-de-sac, including Johnny this time, see Eddie's older brother torture Eddy, because if you remember in the ending scene, Johnny wasn't there. Do you see the writers adding scenes where Johnny is doing something or saying something that only Johnny himself could add significantly to the scene? In my opinion, no. The ending scene worked well as it did, right? So that somewhat proves that even if Johnny was added, it doesn't make it any better, it just makes it different. Now, the cankers are a different beast altogether. Now, yes, their role was a lot more integral to the story, but I feel like we should have gotten more about their relationship with each other, or maybe more about their origin. And sure, they may have referenced this in other episodes. This is the big movie, the big finale. I'm sure a handful of scenes setting up this wouldn't have been too much to ask for. Also, yes, one of the cankers has 3 eyes, but I saw it through editing, so I decided to add it in then, just in case I didn't remember when doing this extra discussion. It was a very neat twist. I mean, you could have added a scar or something, but this truly gives off the inhuman vibe that we often associate with the Cankers. However, they are slightly less linear than Johnny, but linear nonetheless. You see, the Cankers' role was to just help the Eds after being notified by Jimmy and Sarah. Now yes, that's a great role to have, and it added a bit of a ticking clock on top of the ticking clock. And I explained how much I like the plot in the original review, but yeah, they are somewhat one note as well. What differs Lee's intentions from Marie's intentions? What if one of them just didn't like the Eds anymore? Didn't want to kiss them anymore? What if one of them truly got sick of their other sister's antics? They act as one character in many scenes, like the Bikini Bottomites. And if you remember Little Yellow Book, or Someone's in the Kitchen with Sandy, you know that it's easier, but it also amplifies the flaws. Now let's knock out one of the biggest topics of this video. Double D and his hat. Like Timmy Turner's parents' name or SpongeBob's age, what's under Double D's hat is something that a lot of people wanted to know, quite possibly from day one. I wonder if this anomaly inspired the likes of Louise from Bob's Burgers, because it is a very eccentric trait to have. It does somewhat show distrust or insecurity from Double D, but if you remember the episode where Eddy and Double D reveal their nicknames, the children of the cul-de-sac aren't really so understanding. Or are they? Because at the end of the movie, they clearly take the numerous amount of times that the Eds try to scam them out of their money or jawbreakers and forgive them quite easily after seeing that not only revenge that all the children could inflict would have held a candle to the big exposure at the end of Eddy being a liar. Making speculation, I actually think that removing the hat would have had this what the heck sort of vibe at first, but knowing that this is the last time you would have seen Double D, I think this would have given a great lasting impression. It could have worked as a double twist. Now going to the specific scene at hand, Eddy holds his eyes and screams in a ironic way, while Ed asks if it hurts. Now considering what we know about the Cankers, what very well may be under Double D's hat is inhuman. Now before you jump to any conclusions, you must ask yourself two questions. Do you trust Eddy, and do you trust Ed? Because they very well could have been lying or exaggerating the fact that what's under Double D's hat may not even be bad at all. I mean, I do something like that with my friends quite often when they think something is bad, but I play it up to show that I just don't see it that way. Plus, they were in a playful mood during that point, but let's say you do trust them. What can be under there could be anything from a scar to pure baldness, or even knowing Double D, what could be under that hat is just hair, or it's just hair that is difficult or even impossible to maintain. I could go with what Eddy says. Honestly, like the scam, it wouldn't hurt the movie to throw a bone our way, but I can respect their decision. Double D's hair, or lack thereof, will remain shrouded in secrecy. Let's talk a little bit about Sarah. In the movie, she is not necessarily one of the people scammed by the Eds. Rather, the only reason she's in this TV movie is because the Eds did something wrong, and she wants to see the consequences. Therefore, her journey is also very different, but not so linear, because although she's trying to get to the Eds, she also tried and succeeded in escaping the Cankers, so she wasn't as one note. One thing I truly enjoy about Sarah's role was that in the beginning, again, it shows that vulnerability. I do have some comments that talk about this, and I will get to those very soon. I also like how Sarah, in particular, hugged Ed at the end. It was very heartwarming, and that did add to the movie. She was actually toned down. Now granted, most of the time she was with Jimmy, and she did attack the Cankers and Johnny, but I do think her toned down personality worked wonders in this episode. The reason I pointed her out for this extra discussion is to give an example of a character that had more than a one-note journey, but wasn't the main journey. Unlike Kevin, Rolf, and Naz, she didn't want to pound on the Eds because she was never in on the scam. She just wanted to watch, but she also had to escape the Cankers, and this is the best example that I can give on that. There there's not that many kids I could really pick from. This may be a nitpick, but I really do want to talk about this. So throughout the movie, we see most, if not all of it, through the day besides a few key scenes in the night, which would imply that this entire journey happened through a day and some change, which I'm highly skeptical of. Now yes, this doesn't ruin my enjoyment of the movie. I still think this is one of the best TV movies of the 2000s, but it is something super weird that kind of goes unnoticed. Now, would it hurt to have a few more night and day scenes? I'm not too sure, because how we separate the scenes may make things look a little different, and it may make things look like it took a longer time. I'm really torn on this, because I don't know which is more believable. That all of these kids toured through all of these terrains in about a day, or that they would have survived through the days that it actually took. It's a very interesting thing to think about, because they actually broke a rule or guideline or whatever you want to call it, and actually had that broken rule work actually well within the context of this movie. This is a true example of learning the rules in order to break them effectively. I do want to emphasize that this point, and many others, did not dilute my enjoyment of watching this, but I did not put this point in the review because it's more of an afterthought. When watching the scene, you could really feel the barriers being broken. It's a very dramatic scene that in this type of movie really didn't need to be done, but not only was it knocked it out of the park. We get a small hint of the scam with the red button. We receive tons of hints of tension throughout the entire movie leading up to this moment, all the way from something as small as a passing comment to a legitimate suicide prank. Double D breaking was something that was inevitable. In fact, if he didn't, it would actually take away from the movie. He went through a lot. But here is what separates Double D from most characters. He understands that Ed and Eddy screwed him over multiple times, but at the same time, he understands that Eddy can learn and doesn't toss his friendship aside. And that shows a ton of respect, maturity, and the ability to look past the person for their recent mistakes. But I'm not only going to praise Double D. Eddy, who had a dynamic change from the beginning to the end, this was a major turning point for the character. Eddy did show massive remorse for what he did throughout this, and based on a later point, this wouldn't be the only time. For someone who tried so hard to dodge responsibility and throw the blame on other people, like the part where they all threw blame on each other in the car, it took him a massive change to do what he did. There are many people like Eddy in the world who throw blame on others and refuse to be wrong, and many of them don't change. In fact, at this point, many of them decide to break it off from friends, and at that point, show their true colors. It really didn't hit me until I realized what kind of character Eddy has been. A truly slimy, but also childish, playful, and short-sighted person. Now, it could be because of what he learned from his brother, and considering his brother later in the movie, this could be the case. But ultimately, we don't know. Ed's role was a much-needed middleman, because I do feel like his presence in this scene glued it together, because Ed is very simple, and from his perspective, he is friends with both of them. I like how he was saying things like, "The Eds are no more," because that's how the audience feels. I think all of the Eds were at their best in this particular scene, and it is one of my favorites, if not my most favorite, in the movie. This will be a short point because I am not much of a theory person, but I do need this point in order to give extra context to my next point. So if you aren't aware, there is a theory about the Eds and the others having origins in different times, and all are in this purgatory for what they have done. Their deaths shape their personality, and that's why you would never see what's beyond certain places, like the cul-de-sac or school. And I'll link that video in the card right about now. And for those who don't really grasp the concept of a card, I will also link it in the description. But sure, I like to throw in a theory every blue moon, and I will now, in a way. Now, this is a theory, maybe. I'm only calling it a theory because I cannot prove this, but I feel like it is valid enough to say. When you look at the characters of the cul-de-sac, I've noticed something. Look at Naz, she's really into makeup. Maybe her mom is heavy into makeup. Or maybe she's a model. Look at Kevin taking care of his bike. Maybe his dad is really into taking care of his automobile. Look at Rolf, who really enjoys working on his farm with his farm animals and appreciating his old world values. Maybe he comes from a more orthodox family that have taught him his values. Look at Double D. He's very finicky, mature, and loves to follow what his parents give him as orders. Maybe he was conditioned to be this way. The Kankers are a different beast altogether, and I don't think they have a fatherly figure. I think they have a mother, and she's a hopeless romantic, often bringing many men home and rejecting her 3 daughters, which made them act the way that they are, with their skewed perspective on wanting a boyfriend. Jimmy, I feel, either grew up in a largely feminine household or had a really tough, masculine dad that he grew up with, rejecting him because it's not in his nature. Johnny is a wild card because he doesn't really do too much that I can trace to a parent being an influence of. I don't want to say that he's homeless because I'm sure he has a home. I'm sure in the series he's walked home before. But he is a toss-up. My point is that all of these characters, sans Johnny obviously, have traits that can come from their parents. It doesn't have too much depth, unfortunately, like the purgatory theory, but it was a really fun idea for me to explore. That's just my personal take on the characters. I'm aware that it doesn't have too much ground, but it's my speculation and my unique take. Now, the final part, before I respond to a few comments, the ending scene is probably one of the most memorable scenes of my own childhood. Now, the ending scene is very powerful because it tears down the barriers between the characters and their initial intentions. What started off as a group of kids going out to attack another group of kids turned into those group of kids now defending the other kids because of a bigger threat. Let's face it, no matter how much you beat up Eddy, nothing is more embarrassing than being exposed that your big brother was nothing more than a scumbag and you've been worshiping a liar. That hurts Eddy both mentally and emotionally. But then add the icing on this crumbling cake that he's also getting physically hurt in such a tone that the movie's shown that it isn't a really cartoonish feel anymore. It almost feels realistic. In a good way for the audience, but in a bad way for the characters. This scene also shows how the animators and writers can craft a scene to use the exact same setups for violence and change a few key things in order to entice a different emotion. Considering the other work Danny, the creator, has done at the time, you couldn't have reasonably expected something like this. Now, granted, this is a kid's show on a kid's network, but to that, I point to SpongeBob's Gone, Teen Titans Go's Baby Hands, and The Amazing World of Gumball's The Finale, to show that endings don't have to have a traditional happily ever after format. So it is reasonable to expect that maybe the story would have had a harsher ending. And another reason I like this ending and why this ending is so powerful is because of the intentions. You have Eddy, who is shown at the end that everything was a lie. And here's the thing, he must have known. He really must have known throughout this entire journey that his brother was a scumbag and continued to go on this long journey knowing that. That's really impressive, dude. He had so much faith in his brother even after all of the failed attempts to get out of his brother's room, showing that he wasn't actually that great of a person. Even considering where he lives, none of that mattered. He took beatings in front of his friends, his best friends, and tried to garner sympathy. But moving past that, you also have the part with the attack that Johnny initiated, and Johnny wants his revenge, and to that I say, it was a nice way to end it, and if the series ever came back, would you really expect any different than from Johnny's perspective now? My thoughts on the Eds finally being accepted and getting jawbreakers? Well, it does close the chapter. Now, will they stop scamming? Again, up to viewer interpretation, but to me, yeah, I suppose. Overall, this ending scene, like I said in my original review, and in this extra discussion, is great, and made this movie as near perfect to me as it is to many, many people. Alright, so here's the part where I respond to comments, so let's get into it. I like the method the creator used in the first few minutes. You want to know what dumb stunt the Eds did, but we never saw it. All we know is that they messed up so much that they're marked for death by the entire cul-de-sac. I agree with you, the beginning scene was fantastic. It elicited a lot of mystery, and we'd never really seen something like that before, at least to my memory. Maybe something very similar happened, but the intensity really did live up to the grand nature of the movie. This was the best ending possible for the show. You don't need to tell me twice. Sarah isn't stronger than Ed. He's just afraid to put hands on her or defend himself because she'll tell mom and twist the story her way. Now, yes, that could be argued for, but the way that the series has worked and the way that this particular movie has worked, all the kids seem to have very similar strengths, and the only thing stopping them is fear. So yeah, there is a lot of episodes where Ed is portrayed to be extremely strong. So yeah, I can see where you're coming from with that point. A satisfying ending to one of the longest running shows on Cartoon Network, though that's due to the long hiatuses and multiple sudden revivals from cancellation and alleged finales. I personally think there should have been more time to actually flesh out the side plots that ended up being underdeveloped. As a side note, I hate how this never gets any reruns at all anymore, and how Cartoon Network refuses to release the complete series on DVD, thus leaving me no choice but to torrent all of the episodes. I truly agree with you. They did the same thing the regular show. They don't really show too many reruns, if any reruns at all, of the finale. I don't know why Cartoon Network does this. Maybe it's for contract reasons? And yeah, like I said in this video, there is some side plots that could have been developed a lot more. I would have loved a Kanker side plot fully fleshed out. And yeah, it's really weird that they don't release the finale on DVD. But then they will be quick to take it off of YouTube, right? I think that the whole thing with Plank driving the bus was actually all in Johnny's head, a delusion triggered by his losing Plank on a crowded bus. No, I strongly doubt that he's the most well put together. Johnny is known for bending reality, or Plank is known for bending reality, and that could be very plausible. I wouldn't say that I openly disagree, but it is a very confusing scene. And considering a lot of other things in this movie, a lot of stuff has been left up to viewer interpretation. Ed, Edd n Eddy was my jam growing up. I remember watching this movie on YouTube with my sibs, and we had to watch it in part, so thank you for giving it the praise it deserves. No problem, man. If Cartoon Network would release it on DVD, I'm pretty sure you guys would have had less of an inconvenience, to say the least. I absolutely can't wait for that extra discussion video. Glad I can deliver. But that's just because I love hearing people talk about cartoons at length, especially one that I love as much as Ed, Edd n Eddy. Of all the cartoons that I've watched, Ed, Edd n Eddy along with Foster's Home for Imaginary Friends and Phineas and Ferb, I find myself returning to a lot. It's nice to see a review for a TV film I admire so much. I've always loved Eddy and Double D's dynamic in the TV series, so you can imagine how much I adored this movie the first time I saw it. I really got into the show years after it ended, so when I found out there was a movie, I was absolutely flabbergasted, and then worried because TV movies normally suck, and then blown away by how much I loved it. Maybe it's just my nostalgia, but I don't really remember TV movies sucking back then. Now, I'm sure going back, I'm pretty sure I can find a lot of things that sucked in the early to mid 2000s. I'm not gonna sit here and say that that time was perfect and everything was perfect, especially going back to look at some shows in that particular time period. But I really do hope that with this particular TV movie and what Danny has going forward, that you do have trust in AKA Cartoon, because they easily could have sold out with Ed, Edd n Eddy. And I do like how they particularly focused on Eddy and Double D's dynamic, because like I always say, Double D could have really been accepted. He could have fit in with the other characters in the cul-de-sac, but he chose to be loyal. And how was he paid back? With a legitimate suicide prank. Also, I agree with your list of best and worst. Double D might be my favorite Ed. I sympathize with him a lot, but Eddy took the cake in the movie. Double D was pretty spectacular though. I love just watching some of the facial expressions these characters make, but Double D's always seem to take the cake for me. And the voice actor's delivery matches the over-the-top nature of the expressions almost perfectly. I super love it. I really do get that Tom and Jerry vibe from this show. Everywhere from the slapstick to the expressions, it really does feel cartoony. And with shows like Wander Over Yonder, shows like Teen Titans Go, I know I'm giving praise to that show, but we really do need a lot more cartoony shows out there. Just because a cartoon is cartoony and not realistic like some of the other better praised shows doesn't mean that we should totally abandon this over-the-top cartoony nature, which is why I love Wander so much, because it's something that that is slowly being pushed out of the cartoon norm. But knowing trends, I'm pretty sure in a few years, realistic is probably going to seem very cliche or maybe too normalized, and then cartoony stuff is going to make a comeback. But who knows? The future holds limitless bounds. This was a spot-on review. I agree with just about every word here. And honestly, despite it being a TV movie, it's my favorite episode of the entire show. It wraps up everyone nicely. It was also one of the most polished as well. However, I disagree that this show doesn't have bad episodes, because to be honest, it does. However, I can agree that at the same time, it doesn't affect the quality of the show. A lot of the worst episodes from season 5, to Smile for the Ed, to Smart for His Own Ed, The Good, the Bad, and the Ed, and Tinker Ed, even the specials had weak or insulting endings. But I do agree that every episode does have its good segment, even the weaker ones. Now, I do see how a lot of people would think that Ed, Edd and Eddy would have bad episodes, and I'm not saying that Ed, Edd and Eddy is comprised of perfect episodes. I'm just saying that there isn't an episode of Ed, Edd and Eddy that I recall not liking, and I'm pretty sure if I go back, even the episodes that I've seen reviewed, I just can't bring myself to not liking it. Now, I can acknowledge that it's bad, I can acknowledge that it has flaws, but every episode of Ed, Edd and Eddy I like. It's my favorite cartoon of all time. When reviewing, obviously, I'm going to try to be as objective as possible, but when watching in a casual manner, I really do enjoy any of these episodes. They're really good. I love watching the seasons, and even the episodes you listed, even the specials that you listed, I'm pretty sure I would like them as well. 3 eyes! I've never seen her eyes before, LOL. Yeah, like I said, it was something I found out while editing the video, which is why there's no voice to it. It's just text on a screen and then me showing it. It was very freaky to find out. Now, I hear that in other episodes, there isn't a third eye, and you can kind of see what's under her hair. So it's pretty weird. I'm gonna go with the third eye because that's a lot cooler to think about. Ed, Edd and Eddy will remain not only my most favorite Cartoon Network show of all time, but my most favorite cartoon of all time. I totally agree. This show did so much right in terms of humor, which was reminiscent of older cartoons and new ones. Characters that you loved and wish were real. And animation which really stands out from other cartoons up to this day. Not to mention it was simple. No magic, no paranormal stuff, and not trying to be real or deep. Now, I'm going to stop you right there. Thank you for having that mentality, because it's a mentality that I have as well, which is why shows like Steven Universe and Star Vs. I love those shows, but if I had to pick between a comedic show or a story-driven show, I'm going to go with the comedic show. Now, there is that mentality in the community where a lot of people do like deeper shows, and I totally respect that. Heck, I even like some of the deeper stuff from The Amazing World of Gumball. I like some of the deeper stuff from Clarence. I like the Ice Cream Hunt. I did a review on that. So I do like deeper elements. Heck, when watching Gravity Falls, I do like that deeper side. When watching Hey Arnold, I like the deeper side. But it's just something about comedic shows, something about laughing, than being more engaged in the story that I just gravitate more to. But I respect the opinions of people who disagree and think that a realistic cartoon is more preferential to you. But let's keep reading this comment. It managed to be very entertaining while still being grounded in reality. I think it did the childhood cartoon way better than Clarence. Now, I will agree that I did do the childhood concept way better than Clarence. I would not knock Clarence out of the park. In fact, I think Clarence does the childhood concept a lot better than some of the 90s cartoons. I think it's actually on par with some of them. And I already did 2 reviews on Clarence, and I do have a lot of other cartoons to cover, so maybe in a future review, I'll talk a lot more about the childhood aspect, but I wouldn't necessarily push Clarence aside. It just has a charm that I've yet to find in modern cartoons. Not saying modern cartoons are bad, but I do have my gripes, over-reliance on Flash being one of them. And that's another good point. Now, I did say in my Ben 10 review that this reliance on the simple Flash thin outline style that plagues a lot of cartoons really does make a lot of cartoons seem very uniform. And that's the last thing we want in cartoons. We really do want them to be more varied. However, I and many others agree that this TV movie was the best way to end this series before it got stale and suffered the same fate as Powerpuff Girls, SpongeBob, or Fairy Odd Parents. Now, it's funny you say that because a lot of people think that with Very Odd Parents, there was a lot of places it could have ended, but I don't think Very Odd Parents could have did something like this. I do think that somewhere down the line, the writers or Butch would have done something to make the movie seem a lot less impactful. I mean, considering Wishology was okay, but it couldn't have ended that way. It was just too silly. Considering a movie that I'm going to be doing later on, the first live-action Very Odd Parents movie, I don't think it could have ended there as well. Then you have Channel Chasers, or the time when Timmy was shown to be a lot older than he appeared to be. It's just a little too silly. And Ed, Edd n Eddy wasn't really a serious cartoon. It was silly as well. But with this particular movie, they kind of set a lot of that silliness aside, not too much, to end the series respectfully, and I don't think Very Odd Parents would do that. But Powerpuff Girls and SpongeBob, I've heard from other people that Powerpuff Girls suffered through seasonal rot, and with SpongeBob, I know it suffered through seasonal rot. Dude, you did my request. Ed, Edd n Eddy is by far my top favorite cartoon when I was growing up. I love this movie because it showed everyone growing up. If you look back, or look at the detail after Eddy's was defeated, you notice that Sarah and Jimmy were hugging. Little details like that make this such a wonderful way to end the series. Thank you for doing this video. Can't wait for the extra video because theories are my field. Well, I'm sorry I didn't go too much into theories. Like I said, I'm just not a big theory person. I know TV Tropes has a lot of theories on Ed, Edd n Eddy. Now, I know that this is not going to be the last Ed, Edd n Eddy related video that I'm going to be doing. Now, yes, it is the last one I'm doing in a while, unless someone puts a request out for it, because I am going to be doing a lot more requests in the near future, and I'm going to try to put the comment of the request in the video so that I know that I acknowledge that I'm doing this for them. But yeah, like I said in the comment, I'm really glad to take your requests. Thank you, because it was a great experience. It did take a little long to do, but it was a great experience, and I love looking back at it because Ed, Edd n Eddy is my favorite series of all time. But considering the sheer amount of cartoons out there, I don't have a lot of time to talk about it. So I might as well talk about one of the best things about Ed, Edd n Eddy to start off. I haven't watched the video yet, but my problem with the big picture show is how some of the side plots get too little screen time to actually get fully resolved. I'm talking specifically about how the scenes with Kevin and Naz just immediately get cut off by the ending climax, and how Johnny had like 2 scenes which had even a worse lack of development. I think Kevin and Naz had the most developed. You could replace that with Rolf. Rolf wasn't too developed, but he had a pig, so he kind of drew the short straw in that situation. And yes, I do agree with you with Johnny. He's just kind of pushed aside. Maybe because the writers didn't want to dive too deep into his character. Because now that I think about it, maybe the writers didn't want to make Johnny too serious. And plus, we did need this over-the-top comic relief. And yes, Ed is that comic relief, but Johnny just works really well, especially considering the ending. They wanted to make Johnny the new Butt, if that makes any sense. Butt Monkey, if that makes any sense. And the last comment I'm gonna read, this movie changed my perspective on the show. I didn't like the Ed, Edd n Eddy show, mainly because our heroes, the Eds. I didn't like the idea of Ed's plan to scam the cul-de-sac kids out of their money, which they wanted to use to buy Jawbreakers. It was very unusual for me. Most cartoons that I've watched, there is the good guys, protagonists, and bad guys, antagonists, and the Eds were the bad guys of the show. Of course, I was young and didn't know the definition of an anti-hero, and the Kanker sisters are the true evil of the show. So yeah, I stopped watching Ed, Edd n Eddy after season 3. One day in 2011, I was watching Cartoon Network old shows for the sake of nostalgia. I decided to watch Ed, Edd n Eddy Big Picture Story for my curiosity. And oh my god, was that amazing. Thanks to this movie, I decided to rewatch Ed, Edd n Eddy, all of the seasons and specials, with new perspective and appreciation. I was totally wrong about everything of the show, characters and everything. And their animation and art style was unique, and I can't believe Danny made the brothers grunt. Now, Ed, Edd n Eddy is one of my favorite shows and one of the best Canadian animated shows ever. I'm really glad you came around, and I could understand as a kid you looking at the Eds and thinking, why are we focusing on the bad guys? They're trying to scam the other kids. So that is something that could contribute to the error of misunderstanding the show. However, what makes the show brilliant is that they never win, is that they're always humbled. is that you have people like Double D, who honestly could live without Jawbreakers, unlike Eddy, who really wants money, who really wants Jawbreakers. That's his main motivation. Now, if every character was like Eddy, then yeah, you probably wouldn't even like this show, because it is Double D and Ed who truly make Eddy even more likable. I'm really glad you came back to this show. I'm not too sure what was happening in 2011. Was Cartoon Planet happening around that time? Because a lot of people went back to watch the older shows when there was old show blocks on Cartoon Network as Cartoon Planet, or Boomerang in general. And yeah, the same guy who made the Brothers Grunt made Ed, Edd and Eddy. Apparently it was about a dare or something. But yeah, I really do appreciate the comments, guys. I'm sorry I couldn't read too much, but if you do have anything to say about the TV movie, anything to say about the previous review, anything to say about this extra discussion here, let me know in the comments below. What do you think about this new format? And while you're at it, feel free to send in your requests, because clearly I do them. I just get a little sidetracked at times, and there is some stuff that I like to cover before going into the fan suggested category. And also feel free to follow me on Twitter or join my Discord. If you really like this extra discussion, I do have a playlist for it, but if you want to go back and watch the original review, that will be there as well. Make sure to subscribe and feel free to support me on my Patreon. And as always, I hope your time is well spent, and Alpha out.